Right now, at Ukraine's borders, Russia and Belarus have begun something terrible. The secret plan of Lukashenko has been revealed. This is shocking, but the Ukrainian armed forces have already prepared a bloody trap. Russia still doesn't realize that a complete defeat awaits it. This snare will finish off the enemy. Shock, they will take back Crimea. The missiles are already in action. A devastating strike by the Ukrainian armed forces. Ukrainian secret agents attacked the peninsula from within. The Kremlin did not expect this. Sensation? China's secret plan has been revealed. Is this really a global conspiracy? It was decided first thing in the morning. India challenged Trump. It has become known. It was they who kept Putin's military afloat. The end of the war seems to be already predetermined. What was announced in Europe shocked everyone. All this and more in our program Hotspot. Here we go. They have started rehearsing the end of the world. The Kremlin has gone mad. Lukashenko has made an unexpected move. Belarus has begun drills and planning for the use of nuclear weapons. A terrible threat these days. Watch for all the details.
Following Putin, Lukashenko arrived in China to participate in the events of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. Meanwhile, Russian troops have already been deployed on his territory. CSTO and Zapad 2025 exercises. What is happening on the border with Belarus while the two dictators have flown east?
They'll reach Kaliningrad, cut off the Baltics, capture 3 NATO countries, and so on.
Military exercises involving nuclear weapons have begun in Belarus. Ukrainian border guards have heightened their readiness.
We feel confident and calm here. We are not hiding the topics of the exercises. We say that the main theme is practicing the defense of our territory by the joint regional group of forces. These activities are scheduled.
Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan have joined the Collective Security Treaty Organization exercises. China, North Korea and India declined to participate.
Their statements directed at Belarus, claiming that Belarus or the Russian Federation pose a threat to someone, actually contradict the actions they themselves are taking.
According to preliminary estimates, about 3,000 servicemen will come from Russia. Belarus will deploy between 7 and 10,000. According to the authorities of the Republic of Belarus, the maneuvers will take place at the Losvita and Lipetsk training grounds.
Russia and Belarus are not just allies. We share a common and unified defense space, which we are actively strengthening and reinforcing due to the very complex and challenging international situation and geopolitical landscape.
Belarus has planned several separate events at once. Training for the Collective Rapid Response Forces called Interaction 2025, exercises involving intelligence assets called Search 2025, as well as maneuvers for logistics units called Echelon 2025.
The defense of our territory is carried out by a joint regional group of forces. This event is planned in advance. It's not some sudden decision or anything like that.
According to the official version, their goal is to practice joint defensive and offensive actions.
Since 2020, a decision was made to create a regional grouping. In this way, we strictly adhere to the decisions of our heads of state. We conduct these exercises every 2 years.
It has been announced that the use of nuclear weapons and the Oreshnik missile system will be practiced. The Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has already responded to the exercises.
We warn Minsk against reckless provocations. We advise them to remain prudent, not approach the borders, and not provoke Ukraine's defense forces.
In Belarus, they swear that the nuclear weapons themselves will not be used.
You can't use something that, let's say, poses a threat to the whole world, to global security. So how do you plan for that? We'll learn.
Analysts suggest that these exercises may have a hidden goal to create the conditions for amassing Russian troops and equipment on Belarusian territory.
We are ready for the exercises. We're not hiding anything from anyone. We are truly demonstrating openness. These exercises are ours.
Such exercises traditionally cause concern among neighboring countries due to the risk of provocations, incidents, or unpredictable actions.
We have reduced the number of troops by almost half, moved their location deeper into our own territory, hundreds of kilometers away from the border to training grounds.
And at the moment, Russian forces on Belarusian territory consist mainly of transport vehicles, a limited amount of armored equipment and personnel.
We are conducting these exercises by our own decision, independently and not without regard to the countries to our west. This is about raising the level of training of our servicemen and the level of cooperation between the armed forces of Belarus and Russia. We are doing this for ourselves and essentially to show that we are ready to defend ourselves and do not threaten anyone.
But the active phase of Zapad 2025 is scheduled for September 12th to 16th. During this period, an increased presence of Russian units is expected, including tanks and armored vehicles.
They don't believe it, and we don't believe it either, that it's possible to cross the Belarusian-Ukrainian border from here right now. We know what's happening at the border. It's completely reinforced with concrete and mined. It's full of mines. If you try to go there, you'll lose thousands of people.
Well, of course.
Lukashenko has repeatedly assured that the upcoming exercises pose no threat either to Ukraine or to the Baltic countries or to Poland.
They keep warning about the Suwałki corridor, that they'll go to Kaliningrad, cut off the Baltics, capture 3 countries, and so on, NATO countries.
However, back in 2022, he said the same thing about the impossibility of an invasion of Ukraine from Belarus after Zapad 2021. But a week later, he gave his territory to the Kremlin for the attack on Ukraine.
You accused Russia and Belarus of actively planning to invade, just yesterday, to invade the sovereign nation of Ukraine. We didn't invade. So your intelligence and the billions of dollars you spend are worthless.
In response to the exercises in 2025, Poland will conduct its own strategic exercises called Iron Defender, which will also involve some NATO member countries.
The very fact of the Russian-Belarusian exercises does not pose a threat to Poland. The Ministry of National Defense takes them seriously. At present, there are no signs that these exercises could escalate into the threat of an armed conflict.
The commander of the Lithuanian army stated that about 40,000 military personnel will be concentrated in the Baltic countries and Poland.
These exercises after the events of 2022 in Ukraine have acquired clearly defined boundaries of perception. They are now being perceived not just as exercises, but as something possibly more than mere military maneuvers. Disinformation will be coming from absolutely all sides. 90% will be Russian, and unfortunately 10% will come from others. Hysteria will be fueled.
The situation on the border with Belarus and monitoring of Russian military activities remain in the focus of Ukrainian forces.
Breaking news. Ukraine is taking back Crimea. Killer missiles strike. Secret agents attack from within. The Kremlin did not expect this. Everything has been blown up. Sensational. Russia is preparing for war. Iran and North Korea are already involved. Watch all the latest details right now.
Flamingo in action. Ukrainian precision missiles successfully struck Russian military targets in the temporarily occupied Crimean Peninsula. Early in the morning, 3 missiles were launched from the Ukrainian coast. The occupiers failed to intercept any of them, resulting in a strike on a base of Russian border guards who are overseen by the Federal Security Service of the aggressor country.
According to the comprehensive objective control data, as a direct and significant result of the devastating strike on this critical military base, a total of 6 advanced hovercraft and the permanent established locations of all essential personnel were completely destroyed and rendered inoperable. It is quite remarkable that the Russian air defense did not react at all to these Ukrainian Defense Forces air ballistic strike weapons, which indicates either the depletion of the Russian air defense system in occupied Crimea or the high tactical and technical characteristics of the Ukrainian weapon.
In recent weeks, the Ukrainian armed forces have been terrorizing the Russians on the peninsula almost every day. Explosions were heard in Jankoy, Sevastopol, Yevpatoria, and other cities where important military targets of the occupiers were located. As a result of Ukrainian attacks, logistics facilities were put out of action, a train carrying fuel was hit, and a shipborne radar was damaged. Among the destroyed targets were also a unique radio telescope and several modern radar complexes, which seriously weakens the enemy's air defense system. Such a successful attack on Crimea was preceded by special reconnaissance, which was carried out from the air by the aviation of Ukraine's partner countries the day before.
There was increased activity of NATO reconnaissance aircraft over the Black Sea. Moreover, several reconnaissance aircraft were operating simultaneously. We are talking about an ultra-modern bomber. It is essentially an analog of the Challenger 650, modified for long-range, high-precision reconnaissance. In addition, there was recorded activity of a United States Navy Boeing Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft. In addition, on August 26th, French Air Force AWACS were deployed, and subsequently AWACS from the British Royal Air Force were also actively operating in the area.
Meanwhile, Putin's worst nightmare, a NATO army on Russia's border. In Finland, the regional command headquarters of NATO ground forces has officially begun operations. All of this is happening just 140 kilometers from the Russian border and 304 kilometers from St. Petersburg.
First and foremost, this is a political signal to the Russian Federation that Finland is a full-fledged member of NATO, and accordingly, Article 5 of the NATO Charter on Collective Security applies to Finland. In other words, we can say that this is a clear political signal from the NATO bloc in response to the actions of the Russian Federation, specifically the construction of military bases near the Finnish border. This refers to Petrozavodsk, Kandalaksha, and other settlements on the territory of the Russian Federation.
For its part, Russia continues to ramp up the production of cruise missiles, drones, and artillery with the support of North Korea and Iran, which supply key components and technologies.
This concerns the supply of components for Russian drones from Iran. It is also noteworthy that the plant in Yelabuga, located in the Alabuga Special Economic Zone in Tatarstan, was built with the assistance of Iranian specialists. As for North Korea, there is currently information about the transfer from North Korea primarily of strike weapons, specifically the KN-23 and KN-24 ballistic missiles. In addition, the transfer of North Korean-made armored vehicles and artillery shells has been recorded.
And furthermore, Moscow wants to produce the Su-57 in India. Russian specialists are conducting studies regarding the amount of investment required to set up fighter jet production. And while Russia is making plans, the Ukrainian armed forces are carrying out sweeps of the occupiers. Ukrainian forces have liberated the village of Novoekonomichesko in the Donetsk region and raised the Ukrainian flag there.
Until recently, Novoekonomichesko served as the main staging base for Russian assault groups. The assault on this settlement lasted for almost a month, and the capture of Novoekonomichesko is a significant success for Ukraine's defense forces at a time when the situation is stabilizing in the Pokrovsk direction. In addition, let me remind you that Ukraine's defense forces in the Dobropilya direction, which is the Pokrovsk district, have deoccupied 7 settlements.
Ukrainian defense forces have also liberated the village of Udakny from the occupiers in the Pokrovsk direction. Meanwhile, agents of the Atesh movement disrupted the delivery of Russian equipment near temporarily occupied Debaltsev by damaging the railway infrastructure.
Shock. Xi Jinping's secret plan has been revealed. While the Russian dictator is being humiliated in Beijing, it has come to light. China has been playing its own game since the very beginning of the war. What should we really expect from Beijing, and what role will it play in future peace negotiations? Watch now for all the details of the global conspiracy.
This is footage from the camera of a downed Russian Gerberat drone. A recording was found on it from a Chinese factory where this UAV was being tested. The video was published by Ukrainian serviceman Serhiy Flesh Beskresnov. The drone is equipped with an A40 Pro camera made by ViewPro. The factory is located in Shenzhen. The ongoing war in Ukraine has profoundly transformed into a pervasive drone war, and for the Russian Federation it would now be virtually impossible to sustain their efforts without the crucial and continuous supplies of essential components originating from China.
China supplies Russia with engines, antennas, remote controls for drones, and ready-made kits of civilian UAVs. For the fiber optic drones that have been actively used since last spring, China supplies Russia with fiber optic cables. Russia's own production is limited to a single factory, which became a target for the Ukrainian army in April. The largest Chinese fiber optic manufacturers, Yangtze Optical, Fiber Home Technologies, and Fiber Home Technologies, do not officially supply their products directly to Russia. However, according to an Indexbox report, in 2024, China supplied 382,000 tons of fiber optic cable to Central Asian countries. By rough estimates, that's about 4 million kilometers of cable.
According to the publication Verska, Beijing has become a key supplier of military technologies to Moscow. On the last day of summer, Putin flew to China for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit and also attended a military parade marking the end of World War II. It seems that China has decided to finally put an end to playing the role of a neutral peacemaker in the Russia-Ukraine war. Since 2022, one of the most serious threats to Ukraine has been the direct and large-scale military assistance that China provides to Russia.
When it came to the Kremlin purchasing weapons from North Korea or Iran, its options were objectively quite limited: shells, drones, and missiles. But the Chinese defense industry is a hotbed of production lines for all types of weaponry, some of which are directly compatible with Soviet and Russian systems. Source: Defense Express.
Since the beginning of the war, China has sharply increased its exports to Russia of materials used in the production of explosives. One of many examples, Beijing supplies about half of Russia's needs for diphenylamine stabilizer. This stabilizer allows nitrocellulose to be stored and used for gunpowder production.
According to data from 2023, China supplies about 90% of Russia's imports of high-priority goods subject to G7 controls, as stated in the ICIC report. These are technologies necessary for the production of missiles, drones, and precision weapons. Components from Western manufacturers such as Texas Instruments, Intel, and Analog Devices continue to reach Russia through Chinese intermediaries. They have been found in downed Russian Iskander-M missiles, Kwan-101 cruise missiles, and Lancet attack drones. In addition to electronics, China supplies Russia with industrial machinery necessary for military production. Chinese deliveries now account for more than half, or even up to 80% of Russia's imports of machinery, compared to 12 to 20% before the war. Edition layout.
Russian support is not only military supplies. During the war, China became the largest buyer of Russian oil and its largest trading partner in other areas.
Starting with the flow of cheap raw materials from Russia, which has become even cheaper, ending with no one has ever been bothered by another country's dependence on you. So if it increases, but at the very least you're not worse off. Secondly, indeed, we're talking about how America is gradually wearing down its own valuable resources, or rather more precisely, wearing down Russia's significant resources.
If Russia becomes a pro-Western country that supports American policy towards China, China ends up in a strategic encirclement. Therefore, throwing Russia under the bus and completely abandoning its support is absolutely unacceptable for China. Carnegie Alexander, director of the Berlin Center.
In the current format of the conflict, China is considered the biggest beneficiary of the Russia-Ukraine war, and Putin's visit to Xi is further proof of that. For China, there are only advantages in this case. It gets cheap resources from Russia and gains an additional geopolitical lever of influence in its maneuvers with the US and the EU.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now. Urgent. Putin has embarrassed himself in front of Xi again. The statements made in China will shock you. Trump is alive and preparing for a new strike. Incredible. A fateful statement from the White House. This will change the course of the war. And the Kremlin has resurrected a political corpse. They've pulled Yanukovych out of mothballs. For what purpose? Stay very tuned for more.
Putin arrived at the SCO summit in China and has already met with Xi Jinping today to receive new instructions. During his very first speech, Putin managed to deliver a talk about the so-called root causes of the conflict that need to be addressed.
The second significant reason for the ongoing crisis undeniably lies in the West's constant and persistent attempts to actively draw Ukraine into the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, commonly known as NATO, which, as we have consistently and repeatedly emphasized and explicitly stated over many years, poses a direct and profound threat to Russia's fundamental security.
Putin needs allies, and this isn't the first time we've seen a story like this. Russia's reaction was very similar when threats first came from Trump. At that time, Lavrov went to Beijing. Now, for Putin, the main task on the sidelines of the SCO was to gather as many authoritarian states around him as possible, states that would guarantee him support.
At the SCO summit, Russia, China, and India are trying to create a new world order and offer an alternative to US hegemony. Looking at Trump's new policies, they believe their time has come.
A multipolar world is taking shape. Western countries are trying to prevent this, attempting to maintain their dominance not through negotiations or fair competition, but through outright blackmail, pressure, and sanctions. It is obvious to everyone that competitors have not only grown, but are already surpassing the historic collective West by most indicators.
First and foremost, China is trying to build it, and all of this seems to be quite effective. If you carefully look at the often ambiguous and frequently infantile policies of the United States, it is precisely the People's Republic of China, with its considerable soft power, significant economic support, and a notable lack of any demanding conditions or specific requirements toward the leaders of various countries, such as those in the global south, that today very often appears to be a much more reliable and indeed a more attractive partner for such sovereign states.
On the eve of the summit, Kremlin media pulled their pocket Yanukovych out of the dusty closet. He, flashing his new expensive teeth, recited the old propaganda playbook.
The EU partners behaved, to put it mildly, inappropriately during the negotiations. They did not show any understanding of the difficult economic situation in Ukraine. I'll say it straight, they were arrogant. But I was the one who controlled and pushed forward the process of Ukraine's accession to the EU. But I was always a staunch and convinced opponent of Ukraine joining NATO.
This story looks utterly absurd. It's obvious that for Putin, such a statement was important to demonstrate his supposed ties to Ukraine. He keeps trying to tell everyone in the world that Russia and Ukraine, Ukrainians and Russians are one people. And now he has a whole pun-worthy former president of Ukraine who has been stripped of that status. And that's why he supposedly has the legitimate right to conduct military operations on Ukrainian territory.
US President Trump hasn't appeared in public for several days now, and there have even been rumors online that he has died. But the White House has stated that the president is alive and well and will address the nation today. In recent weeks, President Trump noticed a slight swelling in his lower legs. In accordance with standard medical procedure and as a precaution, this condition was thoroughly examined by the White House medical unit. The president underwent a comprehensive examination, including diagnostic vascular studies, which revealed chronic venous insufficiency, a common condition, especially among people over 70. It is important to note that no signs of deep vein thrombosis or arterial disease were found. And as usual, while the Russian people grow poorer because of the war, those who started it are only getting richer. Putin's pocket pseudo-historian and head of the negotiation delegation in Istanbul, Medinsky, and his family own restaurants, hotels, mansions, and other real estate in the historic center of Moscow worth as much as the annual budget of a large city.
There was no Ukraine, there was no statehood. What is there to talk about?
We carefully recorded all of Medinsky's family's real estate in a table, everything that belongs to them personally and to their companies. And it came out to almost 6 billion rubles.
The war goes on. Meanwhile, those who started it travel from summit to summit, making no decisions, but every day continue to lie to their citizens about peace coming soon.
Shock! India has declared war on Trump. Despite the harshest tariffs, India is increasing its purchases of Putin's oil. The Asian giant openly laughs at the US and Europe. How is Indian money funding the bloodshed in Ukraine? What is really behind this brazen betrayal? See all the details right now.
While across the ocean tariffs are being raised to a record 50%, India doesn't seem to be planning to give up Russian oil. Moreover, Indian refineries are already planning to increase imports by up to 20% as early as September. That's up to 300,000 additional barrels per day, according to Reuters.
Without India, it would be difficult for Russia to maintain its export levels. And this would reduce oil export revenues that finance the Kremlin's budget and Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine.
Today, India is the largest buyer of Russian oil. It supplies nearly 40% of the country's crude needs and accounts for about 1.5% of global deliveries. For Moscow, this is a lifeline. For the US, it's a challenge that undermines the strategy of sanctions pressure.
India has significantly increased the share of Russian oil in its overall imports during the war, raising it by almost 10 times, and according to some estimates, even a bit more than 10 times. And now let's see how Trump will act with India.
America sees this as a direct threat. Finance Minister Scott Bessent has openly stated New Delhi's profits from trade with Moscow during the war in Ukraine are unacceptable. And Donald Trump, once again relying on tough rhetoric, threatened that if purchases continue, tariffs will not be 50, but even higher. Tariffs are already the highest in Asia.
India will have to make a choice. Russia and the opportunity to earn about $100 billion, or say $50 billion from Russia. But under such circumstances, it would essentially kill all its exports to the United States, which amount to about $300 billion. Given that the Indian government has always been pragmatic, it's clear that they will have to choose the United States and either reduce or completely stop buying Russian oil, at the very least bringing it down to just 5%. In other words, that's essentially a tenfold decrease compared to the current level.
And this will, I dare say, deal a devastating blow to the Russian economy.
In annual terms, Russia would lose, let's say, about $50 billion from India, which would mean a very serious loss for the Russian state budget, which is certainly not going through its best times. The budget would fall short by $20 to $25 billion. Again, if we look at it in annual terms, this is already a significant figure.
However, for now, Russian oil is going to India at a substantial discount, while domestic refineries are increasing their processing. Moreover, Ukraine's strikes on Russian plants have destroyed at least 17% of the aggressor country's capacity. Now Moscow is forced to send even more raw materials abroad. And for New Delhi, this is of course a window of opportunity.
Many people will lose their jobs almost immediately because the tariffs will affect labor-intensive industries such as textiles, jewelry, and shrimp farming. This will also impact the stability of the currency. After all, the US accounts for 20% of our exports, and about half of the export industries will be affected. All the orders we received from the US have now been cancelled. Clients have asked us to suspend fulfillment of previous orders and halt all production until the tariff situation is resolved.
Thus, Delhi has found itself in an extremely difficult dilemma. On one hand, there is cheap oil and strategic access to raw materials from Russia. On the other, the threat of losing the largest trading partner and collapsing the country's own export market. Trump made the choice simple: either do business with the US worth hundreds of billions or get cheap oil from Russia. For Moscow, the bet is obvious: to hold on to at least one major buyer while the sanctions noose tightens ever more. But if Delhi does end up siding with Washington, the Russian economy will lose tens of billions of dollars, along with the resources needed to continue the war against Ukraine.
Urgent! They want to divide Ukraine. Shock! European leaders are secretly discussing the creation of a 40-kilometer buffer zone between Russia and Ukraine. According to rumors, this idea has already been supported by Moscow. Could it be that Ukraine will be asked to make territorial concessions? And all of this without Washington's knowledge. Details coming up.
The creation of a 40-kilometer wide buffer zone. This is the initiative being considered by European partners as part of a peace agreement, according to Politico, citing anonymous sources. Allegedly, according to journalists, Moscow has supported the idea. There has been no response from Ukraine yet. This is hardly surprising because the creation of a buffer zone would most likely mean the loss of some territories currently controlled by Kyiv. Only Jim Townsend, a former Pentagon official who oversaw policy on Europe and NATO in the Obama administration, has openly commented on this idea from politicians.
They're grasping at straws. The Russians aren't afraid of the Europeans, and if they think that a couple of British and French observers will stop them from marching into Ukraine, they're mistaken.
European diplomats are careful not to comment on the actual partition of Ukraine. It also remains unclear who is willing to send their peacekeepers and when. So far, only the French and the British have spoken positively. The commander of Lithuania's forces stated that his troops would only go to Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire or a peace agreement. The authorities in Poland and Germany are opposed, just like the United States. Another problem is the number of troops. As of today, NATO is having difficulties preparing rapid response forces to defend the alliance's eastern flank from a possible future Russian attack. This requires 300,000 personnel, while patrolling along a potential buffer zone would require an additional 40,000 to 60,000 servicemen. They will not only monitor compliance with agreements, but also train defense forces.
NATO members are negotiating with US representatives about providing satellite intelligence and air support, although they do not expect much greater involvement. Senior Pentagon officials have already informed their European colleagues that the US role in any security guarantees for Ukraine will be minimal. The US Department of Defense did not respond to a request for comment. The US is perhaps the only NATO country with enough satellites to provide the intelligence needed to monitor whether Russia is violating the terms of a ceasefire or peace agreement.
These proposals from Europeans who are troubled by a bloody war on their doorstep are perceived by Ukrainians as empty words.
If they actually provide troops, then yes, because other restrictions don't work on the Russians. On paper, it's not worth a damn. Send missiles, send troops, send weapons. That's a question for Europe. Is there actually any weaponry? No? Are they ready to send troops? They're ready, but not all of them and not right now. After a peaceful settlement, we tell them one simple thing. Friends, you are preparing for war, that the Russians will attack you. We can make sure that they don't attack. Give us troops now, bring them into Ukrainian territory now, and the situation will be over. But the Europeans think we have Budapest, which turned out to be a piece of paper. Zero. We have the notable case of Ichkeria, better known today as the Kadyroshchina.
It is interesting that the first to announce the creation of a buffer zone in Ukraine was the Russian dictator in the spring of 2025. Then this statement became a kind of justification for Russian military aggression in the Sumy and Kharkiv regions. After a massive attack on Ukraine, which killed 23 people in Kyiv alone, the Kremlin sent Maria Zakharova to the microphone. In plain Russian, she once again voiced the Russians' conditions. The peace treaty must include demilitarization, denazification, and a neutral, non-aligned, and non-nuclear status for Ukraine. Interestingly, Zakharova made this statement on the Day of Remembrance for the fallen defenders of Ukraine. It was established at the end of August for a reason. 11 years ago, the Russians, by agreement, allowed the encircled Ukrainian armed forces near Ilovaisk to withdraw through the so-called Green Corridor. But they did not keep their promises and simply shot unarmed soldiers as if at a shooting range.
That's all. And for more breaking news from the front, tune in to the next episode.